Now, we have the opportunity, we have the honor to think about Jim Reason in the next few minutes. This was the first book I ever read on safety. It's the first book I ever read on human performance. And there is more in this book than I can ever go back and I think glean. I was amazed when I picked the book up a decade later that it had everything I thought I had discovered really in the last decade. It was there, I just didn't understand it the first time I read it. So today, we have an opportunity to think about how Jim has changed the path of everyone in this room. And we have a couple of people who are going to help us on that journey. John Rethal and Rob Fisher, and John, who worked directly with Jim at the beginning, will tell us those stories, and then Rob will come and talk about, from that learning, where we started to mold those concepts into the way we do our work. If you would, please welcome John and Rob.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So many bright and shiny faces at this hour of the day. I forget, being retired, that people do go to work at 7:30. Trust me, 9:30 is a much better time. So what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of history from my time with Jim Reason, who I'm sure you know died in February this year. So my role is more the historian. Rob is going to talk about the here and now, I think, and Dave Woods, who I know, oh, I see him hiding somewhere in the corner, will be talking perhaps about the continuation and development and growth of these same ideas. So there's a sort of historical flow. So let me move on. I don't know if many of you know quite how Jim became the august leader of the organization and personal safety work, but it was a little indirect. Jim's early work, when he got his PhD from the University of Leicester in 1977, was actually on motion sickness. And that was taken up and sponsored by NASA and the US Navy research group to do with space sickness in some of the early days of the manned space program. And he was working in that field and published one of the books that I think was on Charles's list, Motion Sickness. But as he found that very quickly, it's very hard to do the classic research in psychology by getting students to throw up thanks to the joys of studying the actual motion sickness. So one thing happened by coincidence around that time. I don't know if many of you have heard this story, but his first foray was in human error was his own personal experience. One day when he was going to make a pot of tea in the English fashion. That involves a teapot, loose tea, pouring the water in. At the same time that his cat, which was a savage Persian cat, was pestering him for food. So inevitably enough, he finished up putting the cat food in the teapot. Most people will go, yeah, I'm stupid, never mind, move on. But that triggered him to start thinking about what were the mechanisms that underlay that, and perhaps that's a common experience to people. That kind of low-level error doesn't have a big consequence, but you know, it's not what you intended. So he started a program at the University of Manchester, where he was now a professor, in getting students to fill out diaries from their own personal experience of things that just were actions not as intended during the day. And other people were thinking about that. He was not unique, but he was one of the first. And in fact, I first came across Jim at a lecture he gave in 1979 in England on that work. And it struck me as a simple engineer sitting in the audience that he was somebody who was thinking about structure of problems rather than just a catalogue of problems. And that really started my work in this area too. That time I was with what in the UK was at that time the Central Electricity Generating Board, working on the case for human performance for one of the new reactor systems that was going on. Anyway, moving on. So he was doing that development work, thinking with the student diaries, and at the same time things were happening in the real world. Perhaps the most notable event that time-wise was applicable was the event at 3 Mile Island in March 1979, which I realize how long ago it is that whenever I've given talks at places like Ohio State University, the students are going, "What? 3 Mile Island? Never heard of it." And you realize that this occurred years, if not decades, before they were born. And it's scary when, to me, it was one of the most, significant events in this development. But other events went on. The release of toxic gases at Bhopal, the Challenger explosion. For people in Europe, one of the significant events was the sinking of the Herald of Free Enterprise, which was referred to as a roll-on, roll-off ferry, where it has a big door at the front. People bring their cars and trucks onto the boat. The nose goes back down to make it seaworthy and leave. Well, in this case, they didn't close the front door, and it departed into the sea and then sank. And another example is Piper Alpha, a North Sea platform. And at the same time, there were a series of conferences. Other people were getting interested in this area. The first one, I think, on record was known as the Clambake Conference in 1979, where John Senders personally organized a gathering of people he thought were the experts, and just personally funded this meeting up in New England. And that was followed by a series of NATO Advanced Study Institute meetings, those dates, 1981, 83, and so on. Gives you an indication of the time frame when this was now a fermenting area, many people getting involved. And perhaps the most important one was a conference in Bellagio. And this is the point where my presentation falls to pieces, because I have one photograph, one pointer, that I want to point out a few faces, but I have two screens. So who prefers that side? Who? I'll assume that this crowd can see this picture, and then on a later one, I'll use that one to get your own back. Now I'll see if the presentation works if I go off stage. Okay. Is it still working? Okay, good. This is Jim Reason sitting here on the front row with people you may know if you're at least in the nuclear business. There's Alan Swain next to him, Neville Morey, John Senders. He was the one who personally organized the first. Now I'm getting confused. Jens Rasmussen, Tom Sheridan from MIT, the legendary Eric Hollnagel. Who else? Where's Dave? There he is. Dave Woods, who will be following on this morning. David Embry. So that was in 1983 at the Advanced Study Institute. Wonderful meeting. It was a week-long meeting at the the Rothschild Institute on the island, on Bellagio on Lake Como in Italy. Everything provided, people working together. And rather sadly, it didn't produce much of an output. It was more the product in your own mind from the meeting being there. Moving on, just to show how much the world changes and doesn't change, Dave Woods, I, and Neville Morey organized a party for Jim Reason for his 70th birthday. And strangely enough, some of the same faces, now I'll go this way, some of the same faces appear from that length of time. So there's Jim. I'm somewhere hidden here by David Embry. Since we were commercial rivals, that was typical of Dave to get in the front. Dave Woods, Eric Hollnagel looking less like a bandit than he did before. Neville Morey, John Senders, Bill Runciman, who was responsible for patient safety in Australia, various familiar faces to me who probably don't mean much. Much of those people in here have been involved in the healthcare business. Liam Donaldson, who was the head of the British Medical Group, Bob Weers, who sadly passed away, was a wonderful leader in lecturing and promoting safety in the American health community. I could keep going forever, and that wouldn't be fair to the other people following me. But I say this is a historical lecture, so I've got to have some kind of nostalgia in there. Rob and Dave perhaps will touch on more of this. This is just simply cataloging the steps along the way. One of the first products that became very noticed by Jim was the generic error modeling system, GEMS, and it was to build on that early framework of how human errors and their influences had effects on different kinds of failure events. A lot of it was built off Rasmussen's skill rule and knowledge-based model. But it started to pull all these things together, and the latent errors, as they were then called, like the organizational factors and soft influences, started to be pulled into this. And then that grew over time with so that was documented in the book Human Error in 1990, which I think had the biggest influence in the beginning. And then that developed into the so-called Swiss cheese model and produced the organizational accidents work, always short referred to as ORGACS. For some reason, people are very puzzled why the word ORGACS was used, but if you had to rate out managing the risks of organizational accidents 100 times, you very quickly give up on that. But as those of you who've read it and will hear more about it, it's really about how the alignment of gaps in slices of Swiss cheese can lead to vulnerabilities, because the defenses in depth represented by those perfect slices, no holes, would have blocked the event. So it's a way of structuring that kind of concern. Now, the work that we did together with Jim was certainly the brains and the architect, and then I was involved later on in trying to take some of this and make use of it. A lot of that work was done at a particular facility in the village where Jim lived, Disley, in the United Kingdom, just outside Manchester. And that was done in the lounge of the Ram's Head. I don't know if Dave Wood still does this, but it was always a question in the exam for people taking the human safety and human performance. They would lose significant number of points if they didn't remember what that name was and where it was. Sorry, I have 2 pointers here, and I keep switching between them. So in terms of products and things that you may have seen in your work directly, there were tools and advice and support given from those concepts. The Tripod Delta and Tripod Beta tools, which were developed for oil exploration and shipping. I wasn't involved in those at all, so I won't try and explain them. It's beyond me. MESH, Managing Engineering Safety and Health, was developed for British Airways engineering or British Airways maintenance after an event on a BAC 111 where the front windshield popped out on the pilot's side. And it was occurred because a maintenance supervisor had the idea that it was about time that these screws that were holding the windshield in got replaced. There's been some kind of corrosion. So he went ahead and replaced them all in the windshield, but unfortunately in the dark of night, they were the wrong size screws. So at 16,000 feet, out popped the windshield with the differential pressure. The pilot survived by having the co-pilot hold his legs in while he's flapping in the breeze, and that led to British Airways wanting to try and improve that kind of event wouldn't occur. Another one that I was most directly involved with was a tool called Payoff that we developed for EPRI as a tool to try and identify problems at the front line and the supervisors. I don't know if Payoff still exists. It does? Okay. So I could go into more details, but I think the point was, at least for me, that was my introduction to resilience work, because one of the resilience questions is how do you learn from success? And one of the things is you investigate the events that were successful, perhaps those that were more successful than people expected, and trying to get information from the front line and supervisors about how things performed and what was unusual there. Anyway, a lot of Jim's work was taken advantage of in the healthcare, both in the UK and the US, particularly in the area, the interest by anesthesiologists of the work, since they're responsible for the patient surviving the surgeries and so on. They took a very keen interest in trying to maintain levels of safety and improve measures of safety. The work we did with INPO with Tony Mashara in the 1990s, work in the oil industry. But the point of that is just to say it covered the central concepts covered quite a wide range of different industries. No, not that one. There we go. These are just some personal observations working with Jim on a sort of continuous basis. The things that struck me was his ability to get in front of an audience of very varied technical people from nuclear industry, from healthcare, to people involved in aircraft maintenance, and so on. Locomotive engineers, sea captains, heart surgeons, and be able to take the ideas that he'd worked with and put it in a way that people could relate to. I think he was almost unique in that ability to convey the ideas of the deeper complexity in ways that people could make a connection to. And he had a great charm with audience. He could charm audiences. He was so good at getting you into his world and grabbing by the fist. What we would say in England, he had quite a character. He was a notorious raconteur. He could tell stories forever and a day. And from a personal point of view and a British point of view, then his wicked sense of humor and tease audiences was quite notorious. One of the things that was always a problem for him was that because the ideas had been taken by the audience, so many questions, and I was, for many of those presentations, was his bag carrier and sidekick. And he would be whispering he'd be saying, "Lovely question, I'm so glad you asked that." And he's whispering out of the side of his mouth saying, "Get me out of here." So my last sentence there about would maintain perfect politeness while signaling his desire for rescue was one of his more endearing characteristics when you're trying to achieve that. So that gives you maybe a history. I don't want to take up more time than I have because Rob has his time slot to come. I won't be staying around after this session this morning because I have other obligations to get to. So this is just a note on my last slide here. One of the things that happened for Jim was that he was awarded in the British Honours System an honour called the CBE, or Commander of the British Empire, which, just for information, is one step below a knighthood. So he didn't quite make Sir Jim Reason, though we had numerous conversations over glasses of whiskey about what would it take. What do I have to do to get the upgrade? Typical Jim. And it was specifically for services for reducing the risk in healthcare. And that's basically all I have to say. So thank you for listening.
Hey.
Shut up, Dave.
That was John's job. Keep me quiet. And you also know how he has struggled for the last 40 years to succeed in that task. But this might be John's last public appearance. So, will everybody please give him an ovation for everything he's done for 45 years to build safety. John, you're great.
Okay, Dave.
Even though we argued a lot. And he couldn't shut me up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
So great. All right. What's a hug? Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
Dave, as John was going to leave the stage, my first memories were of John being a little bit of Jim's handler. And I rarely talk about Dr. Reason without mentioning John and his contribution to kind of helping us manage things. So, clicker. So, I go back to a time where I was more of a fanboy than a colleague. But I remember Dr. Reason kept saying, "Call me Jim. Just call me Jim." And I remember, shoot, I didn't expect this. I remember him talking to a non-degreed operator the way he would talk to engineers and doctorates, and the way he treated me. I just can't explain it. I got handed the book Human Error and told, go make this work. We were at the first nuclear power plant that got our keys taken away because of human performance problems, and nobody knew what it was. Jim would come down, John would come down, we'd sit down in Atlanta in a room, and he would explain to us what he was trying to convey in very technical terms in Human Error. And then he started writing a book that you know as Managing the Risks of Organizational Accidents. What I know is a flyer, a typewritten little pamphlet that was sat around the table, and that's a picture of it that I still have in my office, of what he was calling at the time Managing Organizational Accidents. And I still have that typewritten copy that he passed around and said, what do y'all think about this? Asking an operator what we think about the work of probably one of the greatest geniuses of our time in understanding how and why humans do what they do. Then he started writing the other books and making more contributions. And all I want to do for the next 4 or 5 minutes is just talk about the fact that this gentleman deserves a legacy. This is not something where you want to look up on your wall. Bob and I were talking about this morning. You know, a lot of us will look up on the wall and there'll be a picture, a black and white picture of a bunch of people, and we don't even know who our great-grandparents are. That's not going to be his legacy. So what I would like you to do is understand that it's the people that we touch because of him. Everyone in this room are part of his legacy, whether you knew it or not. The question is, what are you going to do to join your legacy to him? That thing about 3 Mile Island, I tell people all the time, look, we got to stop teaching things in a way that says, you know, when I was young, we walked to school barefoot in the snow, uphill both ways. I know, Grandpa. Folks, that's 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Challenger to the people that are coming out of college today. We have to explain what's behind it. So I just want to talk about 4 things very, very quickly, and I'm going to fly through them. I want to talk about cheese, I want to talk about gyms, I want to talk about procedures or rules, and I want to talk about culpability. How many of you know that those 4 things are addressed in some of Jim's work? Great. So how many of y'all use hierarchy of controls in your work? Okay? But did you realize that if you turn it on its side, the way we have morphed Swiss cheese is it's the hierarchy of controls switched on its side. The problem is the Swiss cheese model was designed as a failure model. Now we're trying to predict where all the holes are going to be and where all the cheese is going to move to, but we forget that administrative barriers are going to fail at the rate of the individual using them at the time. I love that you connected it back to gyms. I don't think people know that that's where it started. Not gyms, J-I-M-S, G-E-M-S. So if you think about it, the way the Swiss cheese model was designed kind of morphed. It's all spread out over time. It's all the pieces of cheese move. The holes change size. Those are 3 forgotten attributes, but let's go back to what he said. The Swiss cheese metaphor is represented by a moving picture. So when people say to you, the Swiss cheese model doesn't work because it's linear and our events aren't linear. Okay, that's not the way it was designed. Go talk to Grandpa about walking uphill both ways to school in a barefoot. In the general or generic error modeling system, modeled after Rasmussen and Jensen's work, that was his derivation, was a great explanation of that let us understand that this person on this task at this time is all it applies to. It's not a global model. It's about you sitting there in this moment on this performance of this task, and they have criteria associated with those elements, and we forget the criteria. Not only that, we misinterpret the rates. So if you think about it from a big picture perspective, the skill base is about our habits, the rule base is about our processes, and knowledge base is about gaps in our knowledge. Shouldn't our folks know about that? But man, was he ahead of his time. I want you to read some of this. I know there's a lot on this slide, but we got 2 modes, conscious and automatic. That starts sounding familiar, doesn't it? Unconscious isn't aware of the things that are going on around it, can't make decisions in that unconscious mode. Our brain prefers to operate in that mode. Doesn't that sound a lot like System 1 and System 2 thinking? He wrote this in 1991, folks. That's a legacy that people are still explaining today. But if you understand performance modes, then you can see vulnerabilities, then you can do something about it. That's what he wanted people to do, not just know that they existed. If I say something wrong, I want you to jump up and go, that's BS. Okay. When we talk about procedures or process or rules, the things we're hearing about rules today have really not derived from that point of thought. How many of y'all have heard some of the things on the screen? Right? And we keep inching towards it. But the reality is, what Jim said was there's 3 kinds of rules. There's good rules, there's bad rules, and there's no rules. And if he were here today, I don't want to speak for him, he would say that some of the morphing to say we don't need any safety rules, and I'm not saying we're saying that, right, Todd? I'm saying this is how it's being derived out there, that we have to stop the train from being on the wrong track for a while, because some of these are crucial to the dissemination of our knowledge in our organizations. And then you go to culpability. My question is, if you call something a culpability model, what do the people that you're running it on think you're trying to do? It's in the name. But it gets even better. What do the people that are running it think they're trying to do? Again, say it with me, it's in the name. And the same thing happens when you just take the same thing, slap a different label on it called accountability, and you try and run it that way. So started with you can blame or you can learn. Now if you can blame, but you're going to limit learning. And all of the elements that have come around are derivations of things that he did, that we've even started talking about adaptability and how that adaptability manages people. My question to you is, where are you in his legacy? And I hope you question yourself on that. You're here today. There were 8 or 10 people sitting around a table back in the day. If I ever thought in the early 1990s, sitting around those tables with you guys, just banging things around, being asked to call him Jim and telling jokes about us and funny, dry sense of humor. If I'd ever thought that that would have led to me writing a book called Understanding Mental Models, I'd have told you were crazy. But I want to thank everybody in here for making me a part of that legacy. We've been doing this together as a group, as a community, for 31 years. And it is all because these two gentlemen were willing to sit down with us and teach us and be patient with a non-degreed operator that couldn't figure out some of the things they were talking about. Folks, I hope you join your legacy to Dr. Reason. And I appreciate and am humbled by the fact that you've allowed me to become part of that legacy. Thank you very much.